Appreciate for parents that can do a little day after day after, and other caregivers. Now, welcome again to worship this morning, and welcome to those joining us on Facebook Live. Appreciate your participating with us. We continue today in the season of Easter. It's easy to think of Easter as a day, and it certainly is that. It's easy to think of Easter as a point in history, and it's that too. But Easter is more of a mindset and much more of a season, and we continue in the season of Easter. We have the paraments are white, and perhaps most significantly in some ways, because I get asked this question a lot, the Paschal candle, and the mysteries we have behind when the Paschal candle is lit. The Paschal candle is that big tall one up there, not to be confused with the Christ candle, which is the center one in the Advent wreath. The names get interchanged. This is a Paschal candle, and it is a reminder to us once again that Easter is a season. Easter is a mindset. And so for the 50 days of Pentecost, the Paschal candle is lit every Sunday. And every time we get together, really, it's supposed to be lit. If we're together in the building, it should be lit. Again, as a reminder of our risen Savior. As we continue in our season of Easter, we look at one of the stories of the people who encounter the risen Christ. Now, this would be just a little bit odd, wouldn't it? Something of a surprise, I think. And one of the disciples has some questions about the reality of Christ's resurrection. So today, let's join in with the disciple Thomas, our erstwhile friend, as he wrestles with his faith and wrestles with the idea, the reality of a risen Christ. Thomas takes a lot of heat for his apparent doubt that this man they speak of is, in fact, the risen Christ. Thomas wasn't there when Jesus appeared to the others, and so he's got some questions. Now, so far as I know, there are no other disciples who have their own tagline like Thomas does. Because what do we call Thomas? Doubting Thomas. Absolutely. I don't think any other disciples do. In Mark chapter 3, verse 17, there is a reference to Jesus calling James and John the sons of thunder. But I suppose that's fine. And I guess nobody really knows what that means to start with. And you don't hear it anywhere else in the Bible. And it's not a phrase that we use today. We'll call somebody a doubting Thomas. We don't call anybody a son of thunder. It's not a phrase that exists today, but doubting Thomas still does. And I don't understand that necessarily, because he asked one question. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, but we don't call him denying Peter. Judas betrayed Jesus. We don't call him betraying Jesus, or betraying Judas. Thomas asks one question and is known forevermore as doubting Thomas. He wasn't even there to see the marks in his hands and sides. And he asks one question. And has forevermore made doubt a bad thing. I don't know. I don't think asking a question is a bad thing. I don't think asking a question belies the idea of doubt. It means you're asking a question, not that you're doubting something. I mean, maybe you are, but it doesn't have to mean that. You can be seeking greater knowledge. You can be seeking greater clarity when you ask a question, and that seems like a fine thing. As you increase your understanding of anything. And I think, even more importantly, we increase our understanding in matters of faith. Thomas wasn't present when Jesus showed his hands and his side to the other disciples. And so it's not unreasonable that Thomas is asking a simple question. He could have held off, saying he wouldn't believe until he saw Jesus. But we're not talking about an everyday run-of-the-mill occurrence. We're not talking about Jesus breaking his arm and getting out of the cast. This is crucifixion. This is resurrection. This is the Son of Man and the Son of God, who they watched being crucified, and is now risen from the dead. He's up, and he's walking, and he's talking. I don't think Thomas got a fair shake. I think he is being derided way too much for asking a simple question. To my way of thinking, we should be asking questions. We should be asking questions about, well, pretty much anything. We should be asking, what's this? What's this? And we should certainly be asking questions about our faith. If we just accept anything that somebody that gets 15 minutes on Sunday morning says, we're going to end up in a really weird place. And if you don't believe me on that point, watch a couple of news shows on any given morning. Pick whatever two you want. And just see how weird it gets. Because it absolutely does. Asking questions helps clarify our thinking about something so that we're not led down some path that somebody else wants to take us to. That someone with a microphone chooses to take us on. And it's no different with faith, and in some ways even more importantly with faith. Asking questions and deepening our understanding of our faith can keep us from ending up in a weird place. The story of so-called doubting Thomas has had the unfortunate effect of stifling questions. Some folks see questions as doubt, and doubt as a lack of faith. And God won't like us very much if we appear to doubt or have a lack of faith, right? Isn't that how it works? We have to earn our... No, of course not. God's going to love us completely and totally, and certainly already does and always will. Yeah, not to mention the reaction of other people of God. The reaction that other people of God can have when they see someone else asking questions. And in their judgment, they land on questioning that person's faith. Your lack of faith is most disturbing, Thomas. Oh, wait, wrong movie, sorry. I don't think I'm too far off on this. I don't think I'm too far off on this. I've got too many people apologizing when they ask perfectly good questions. Pastor, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't ask this, but... and fill in the blank with some really great questions. I think those questions are a great thing. And how we have been taught to apologize for asking a question is beyond me. But we have. And stories of so-called doubting Thomas feed into that. Questions are a good thing. We have a term. We have a term for organizations, particularly religious organizations, that don't allow questions. We call them cults. And cults are a bad thing. They don't allow anyone to question their authority. And they ask people to do horrible things sometimes. And when people have been ingrained to not ask questions, to not question the authority appointed over them, so to speak, they then do those horrible things. Our protection from being led down that kind of path is our ability to ask questions. Asking questions keeps us going to some weird places. Now, I know that we don't have anyone here who would be judgmental about your having questions, but I'm going to ask you to answer this question in your mind only, anyway, because we don't, even though there's nobody here. We'll just make it a rhetorical question. Answer in your own mind this question. Have you ever had doubts about God or some aspect of your faith? Have you ever had doubts about God or some aspect of your faith? Good, good. Join the club. Let's go grab a soda or coffee or a beer and we'll talk about it. These are good things to talk about, to wrestle with, to discuss, to have out in the open, to have conversations. I think it's, number one, I think having the questions and the doubts and all those kind of things is pretty normal for starters. I don't know that I've ever met anybody that hasn't had that at some point, me included. And it's a healthy thing to have it out there and wrestle with our faith a little bit. God would rather be wrestled with than ignored. This much I'm certain. God would rather be wrestled with than ignored. Because God ultimately is after a conversation with us. God is after a relationship with us. And sometimes conversations with God are a little tense, are they not? And sometimes conversations with God are smooth and loving. And as far as I can tell, most healthy relationships have a little bit of both in their conversations. God is so serious about having a relationship with us that Christ died on the cross to repair that broken relationship. A relationship that is broken, a relationship with God that is broken because of our sin. All the things that we say, all the things that we think, all the things that we do that get in the way of our relationship with God. All those things that we think and say and do that put up a barrier, our sin, a barrier between us and God. We talked about, during Holy Week, I think it was Thursday night, Monday, Thursday, we talked about the curtain in the temple being torn in two at the moment of Christ's death. And when we think about that visual representation of the wall, the barrier coming down. Because in the temple there was the place where God was believed to be present. They call it the Holy of Holies. And there was a curtain around it. And that curtain was the separation to keep us dirty and scruffy folks away from the Holy of Holy God. Because a Holy of Holy God wouldn't want to mess with dirty and scruffy folks like us, right? And in that description of the curtain being torn in two, it's a physical representation. We can visualize that curtain that is between us and God being torn apart, torn asunder. That barrier is ripped apart. That barrier is destroyed at the moment of Christ's death. God so wants that relationship with us that God gave His Son Jesus on our behalf. Christ died for us so that curtain, that barrier was rent asunder. Likewise, the barrier of our sin was cast away thanks to Christ's sacrifice on the cross. And so we are a forgiven people. We are a resurrection people. Now we get to live as both. Thanks be to God. Amen. If I should please stand as you are comfortable and able, we continue worship in song.